Hey everybody, how's it going? Hopefully y'all are having a great day. Today's video is going to be a bit different. It's not going to be me talking about some abstract concept or, talking about how I do things. Today's video is actually going to be a book review. It's something that I've been very excited to do, and for those of you who have watched my other videos, you can probably surmise what book I'm talking about here. But I've recently finished 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I wanted to talk about the book. I wanted to kind of briefly go over what the book talks about, as well as my initial thoughts, and whether or not I think it's worth the read. I'm going to talk about the good and very few, if any, bad. So hopefully you enjoy. So first and foremost, this book should really not be foreign to a whole lot of people. If you're any at all familiar with the self-help genre, or whatever you would classify this book under, you've probably heard about this book, and for good reason. It's fantastic. I, for the longest time, put off reading this book because I thought, it's too mainstream. I'll read some other books or whatever the case was. And whether it's the deep hipster in me or whatever the case may be, I just didn't read it. And my significant other had sent me a video, and it was by somebody that I think is a fantastic content creator and pretty smart and wise. He had recommended this book along with a few others, and I thought, okay, I'll pick it up. So I ended up buying it, and at first it started a little slow, right? I will admit that, and that's on both the physical book and then with the audiobook reading. My significant other's doing the audiobook. I did the physical book. Both kind of start slow, right? It does have like stories, which I think is nice. It's kind of a good hook, but I think it could have been sped up a little bit. But once you actually get into the habits, it's very good. And it really just like, it strings you along from section to section to section, and you're just like hooked, right? It took me a while to finish. It's a 400-ish page book, at least the updated with fresh insights version. So right around 400 pages. I could read about maybe like 35 to 45 minutes per day on the train in. So then I only train in about 3 days a week. So with the occasional reading on the weekends, it took me about 3 months and change to finish the book, starting in January and finishing, a few days ago. But it was worth it. It was worth every second of it. And without kind of like going too into the weeds about the book, I did want to talk about the concepts. But first, do I recommend this book to people? Yes, I genuinely would. I think this book is very similar to like therapy, where if you go in with an open heart and you go in with an open mind to actually genuinely improve yourself and learn something about yourself, I think this book is fantastic. You will pull away a lot of lessons. And it is a book that I personally plan to read maybe another 4 or 5 times in my lifetime at different stages of my life. This book is so dense and it's so content heavy that you can't help but derive different things from it, I think, depending on where you're at in life. I think reading this as a parent is going to be a completely different experience than reading this as a 20-something in a relationship, right? It's just going to read completely different. And I'm excited for it. It's going to be a new experience every time. So it's definitely going to be something that I'm keeping on my shelf and keeping readily available. Would I recommend this to somebody who isn't like wholly serious on improving or anything, but wants to just know the base concepts? Probably wouldn't recommend the whole book. It is dense. I think you might not get through all of it, or you might get through a portion of it, which isn't bad. I think if you get through at least the private victories, which are the first 3 habits, I don't think you can go wrong by doing that. So even if you bought the book only to go through the first 3 habits, I don't think you would be wrong by that. Would it be better if you read all 7? Sure. But some is better than nothing, right? I would also say maybe if you were like, you just wanted to understand what the book was about, you could probably just go on ChatGPT and ask it, hey, summarize the 7 habits of highly effective people for me and highlight some key things about the habits. And I'm sure it would give you enough for you to kind of understand roughly what it's talking about. I do think that at some point you should probably pay your respects to the 7 Habits and read the book, but I understand that sometimes you don't have the time, sometimes you don't have the energy or the money to get into the book, and that's fine. Because I was there not too long ago, like mentally, I just wasn't there for reading. So anyways, that being said, I wanted to kind of go over the different habits and kind of briefly talk about them. So the way that this book is organized into 7 different habits, 3 of which are the first 3 habits, which are in what's called the private victories. Now, the private victories are the improvement that you do within yourself, right? These habits are focused internally. The next 3 habits, 4, 5, and 6, are what's called the public victories, or they're the like external habits, the things that you do that affect other people. And then habit 7 is both an internal or both a private and public victory. It's kind of like a methodology and a habit to renewing yourself to be able to go back through the 7 habits every single day and have the energy to do so. So with that being said, first off, the book begins with habit 1, which is, be proactive. Habit 2, which is begin with the end in mind, and habit 3, which is put first things first. These I thought were pretty interesting. I think by far of the first 3 habits, I would say my favorite is probably habit 2. I think after reading habit 2, a lot of my life and a lot of the decisions that I make in life, and as well as like my complacency is a terrible word. My general just being happy with life, right, was significantly improved. And the example that he gives is if you're on your deathbed and the people that matter to you in life were to say something about you dying today, what would they say? Or what would you want them to say, right? Well, I would want my significant other to tell me or to say that he cared. He was a loving person who always made time for me. For my parents, I would want them to say another thing. For my friends, I'd want them to say another thing. But ultimately, those are your end goals. And your day-to-day actions should be actions that drive you towards that, right? If I want the message to be, he always makes time for me when I need it, and I'm not there when my significant other needs me, then I'm not being an effective person as I've outlined in my own definition of who I am and what it would take for me to be an effective person, right? And sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes there are going to be tough decisions that you will have to make that if you want to be an effective person by your definition, you will have to make that decision, right? It could be that, work's extremely busy and you definitely want to be there, but there's a significant life event that you have to say, you know what, hey, employer, I'm really sorry, but I have to be there for this. I hope you understand. And you will have to make that tough decision. But I think ultimately that is what's going to make you an effective person with the people that matter and the definition of effectiveness that you've set for yourself. So it's also kind of been very easy for me to define my day-to-day life when I'm thinking with the end in mind, right? Working out's not hard anymore to me. I mean, it's always tough to get started, right? But I know why I'm doing it, right? I know my end goals. I know what I want to do with my my personal fitness, my health for my family, things like that. So those decisions I know are effective decisions. And then putting first things first is kind of an extension of that, quadrant 2 activities, to use the 4 quadrants, where it's quadrant 1 is urgent and important. Quadrant 2 is not urgent, but important. Quadrant 3 is urgent, but not important. And quadrant 4 is not urgent, not important. Basically preaches that you should spend a majority of your time in quadrant 2. This is the activities that are more proactive, that take a little bit more foresight into what is going to be needed, but is ultimately very important for you to do, right? Like health-wise, urgent and important is I'm having like a heart attack and I need to, or I've had a heart attack, or let's say I've had high blood pressure or something like that, right? And now like I need to do something about it, right? Whereas quadrant 2 would have been like changing your diet early on, and kind of like taking preventative measures versus reactionary measures, right? People who often spend their times in quadrant 1 are like checklist oriented people who kind of just do things as they come in, maybe not necessarily by what first things first should be, right? So those 3 are very intertwined and kind of like gaining mastery over yourself. And ultimately what kind of brings you from this state of dependence to independence, right? So they define 3 states of being, which is dependence, where you're just like, you're dependent on other people, right? Then they have the independence, which is I think what a lot of society strives for, which is being self-sufficient, right? You can like handle things on your own. You don't need other people. And I think wrongly that is considered the pinnacle of human existence is independence. But the book then goes into this concept of interdependence, right? Which is different than independence. Interdependence is the acknowledgement that while you could do things on your own and be independent, the sum is greater than the parts, right? So I acknowledge that I can do all these things on my own, but in collaboration, we can do and accomplish much more, right? You cannot jump from dependence to interdependence. You have to master the first 3 habits to step towards independence. And then from independence, you master habits 4 through 6 to get to interdependence. That's actually a good segue point to start talking about the next 3 habits, which is think win-win, think win-win, seek first to understand, then be understood, which is probably my favorite of the public victories, and then synergy, right? So now that you have entered the realm of now that you've entered the realm of public victories, it starts to kind of talk about how these habits affect others and you, right? So thinking win-win is everyone has heard of it, but very few people actually possess the ability to carry it out. It goes over the different scenarios. So there's the win-win, win-lose, lose-win, lose-lose, win or nothing or no deal. And it kind of talks about I don't want to say the personality traits behind each of those people, but for example, like win-lose, you're just looking out for yourself. You don't care about other people. Lose-win, you almost let everyone else like walk over you, and you don't really voice any of your preferences, your concerns, anything like that, right? To be win-win is very difficult, right? And that kind of goes into, and there's a ton of actually like good content on habit 4 that I think kind of gets eclipsed if you just look at this video, or if you just Google search or ChatGPT main topics. So that's a small incentive for you to go read the book. Next is to seek first to understand, then be understood. And this, my God, is I mean, throughout the book, he talks about like different points where his dad, who kind of started all of this, would go through phases where he thought, this habit would be the most important, or this habit would be the most important. I am at the phase where I do genuinely think that seek first to understand, then be understood is probably the most important to me right now. And it's this idea that you need to give people what they call in the book as emotional oxygen, right? And all throughout life, people don't really listen, right? you can either, like, a lot of people just like flat out ignore you, right? Some people kind of selectively listen to you when they feel like it or they hear something interesting. Some people will listen, but only listen with the intent to respond to you. So they may have a response geared and they're just waiting for their chance to just like say their response, right? And then there's the people that genuinely listen to try and understand where the other person is coming from. And when you do that, something magical happens, right? They talk about this emotional bank account, where activities where you genuinely give people emotional oxygen hugely boost that emotional bank account, where once that gets to a certain level, you gain access to this level of trust, to this level of like care for one another, right? So I've started trying to do that, not just to like, you know, in a therapy kind of way to other people, right? Like, oh, my friend's having a rough day, let me just try and listen to them, right? No, just genuinely throughout life, like just trying to understand where everybody's coming from. I mean, you think about how many different variables come into play when you talk about your upbringing, life, you know, your experiences. Like, the fact that we just don't try and listen is now baffling to me, right? Like, feels like I've used this example in the past, but it feels like I've felt true level and now everything feels like odd. It's just like so many misunderstandings at work would be solved if you just tried to listen to the other person first and like understand them and then state your point, right? The issue is everyone's like trying to just say their point because no one genuinely is like on average heard more than not, right? So you're kind of conditioned to just like push your point out, push it out. Like, spouse, boom, let me tell you my thoughts. Job, boom, let me tell you what I'm thinking, right? Instead of just like genuinely listening to somebody to understand them. And you'll know you're at the point where you are able to now be understood when you're able to say back and kind of summarize what the other person is feeling and saying better than they can themselves, right? It's not enough to just like parrot the words back to them, but to genuinely understand where they're coming from is tough, right? But once you do it, it's like they'll just like feel so like revitalized. I don't know. It's crazy. I've done it a few times in like my day-to-day interactions, and it's something that takes a lot of practice. Like actively listening to somebody to understand them is tough. It takes a lot of energy, but it is worth the exercise. Trust me. Like, I'm not even good at it yet, and I can already see a benefit, right? Personal life, friendships, work, everything, right? And when you seek to understand people, you kind of see that like not everyone's a dickhead, you know? Like, you may go through life and think like, what the hell? Like, why is that person that way? Until you actually like try and like understand where they're coming from and listen to them, you might kind of see like, oh, I get it. You know, what is being communicated to me might be, you know, a micromanagey person, right? And sure, should they work on their delivery? Absolutely, right? Not excusing anybody's lack of refinement, but once you understand where the delivery is coming from, you almost gain this like sense of like empathy or sympathy for the person, and you're like, you know what? I see where you're coming from. I know, I understand what your objectives are here. And I think we can create a scenario where this is like mutually beneficial, a win-win, and create that synergy between people. And then to move on, habit 7 is sharpening the saw, which goes around all of the habits, right? Here, I'm going to show you a picture of the 7 habits. There you go. Giving away the sauce. Boom. So if you see there, leave that up for a second. So the first 3 habits are on top of dependence, so that once you learn those 3, once you master the private victories, you go to independence. And then from there, you have habits 4, 5, and 6, which encapsulate the public victories. Once you master those, you can bridge the gap between independence and interdependence. And then habit 7, sharpening the saw, goes around everything, and it helps you keep yourself sharp and ready and able to carry out the 7 habits. And that one I think it's a good to know, but I don't think it carried the same substance to me as the other 6 habits, but it's still important. And it talks about how to kind of like rest, like mentally. It goes over that there's like different concepts of rest, right? It's not just like go to sleep, right? You need the physical, like the physical resetting or the physical sharpening, I should say. And that's workout, like the body is a beautiful thing. Use it, right? Cycle, do some jumping jacks, try a push-ups, like use your body and feel restored in that sense, like sharpen yourself in that way. Then there's sharpening of the mind, which is learn something. Do your best to learn every single day, right? Don't neglect that. The mind really is a muscle. I mean, you use it or lose it. And if you're not actively going out and trying to learn new things, then you're going to lose it, right? Like you lose the ability to take up new material, like the 7 habits, right? So physical, exercise. Mind, learn something. There's the spiritual or the emotional, right? And that's to like serve others, right? To, let's see, what did they say? Service, empathy, synergy, and intrinsic security is the other one. That's the social emotional. And then the spiritual is the either religious or meditation or whatever the case is. So you reset, basically you sharpen the mind, the heart, the body, and the social with other people, right? Like going out with friends or like doing some volunteer work or something like that, right? So talks about those 4 areas and why it's important for you to kind of do activities routinely in those 4. I think it's important. Yeah, I do think that you would get a lot of like value out of doing those. But like I said, just in comparison to the other 6 habits, I really thought the other 6 were like significantly stronger. Which kind of leads me to like the only negative I would say is the beginning and ending are a bit long. Just for my taste, right? And the ending may have been long just because I was so like ready to finish it that I was like, yeah. And then it's like, oh, another chapter. Oh, and the beginning was just long, probably because I was just so excited to get into the 7 habits. So I think maybe in hindsight, they just felt long because I was so excited for what came next. So all in all, fantastic book. I couldn't recommend it more. It is definitely something that I'm going to be reading multiple times throughout my lifetime. And I really hope that it does the same for you. And I think as I go on, as I read books and I keep up making videos for this channel, I may just start reviewing every book that I read. I've read a few already that maybe I'll go back and review, or maybe I'll read again. I don't know. But yeah, this is fun. I'm really enjoying it. My next book is The Psychology of Money. So whenever I finish that, I'll make another review. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you found it helpful, and hopefully it's inspired you to at least look into the 7 habits of highly effective people, if not buying the book and reading it yourself. If you do end up reading the book, or if you haven't read the book, or if you even just look up the points, I'd love to hear about it in the comment section. Feel free to write it down there. I always look and I always respond. So without anything else to say, I hope you all have a wonderful night, wonderful day, wonderful evening, wherever you may be. Have a good one. See ya.